Good morning. Well, this is the quietest this group has been all week. I don't know what to do about this. That's right, that's right. Well, it is good to have all of you here at the new McLane Stadium. It is an exciting day for us as a state to have these two champions sitting down next to each other. I have been eager for this event for almost 6 months. It has been 6 months in the works, and so we are grateful to be able to be a part of it. We're grateful. Congressman Castro, we know that he got out of session late yesterday, made it to San Antonio, is back here this morning and off to Midland after our reception. And so we know you have a tight schedule, that it's election season, and so we're grateful for you spending some time with us this morning. Well, I want to point out a couple of folks that are here with us. Russell Dvorsky is the Executive Director of the Heart of Texas Council of Governments. We're glad you're here, Russell. And my good friend Tim Head, who was the district manager for Congressman Flores. Tim, where are you? There he is. Tim, we are grateful for your service. We just found out that Tim has been appointed the Executive Director of the Faith and Freedom Coalition in Atlanta. So Tim, we owe you a round of applause. Tim has been faithful to this university and faithful to the Congressman in his tenure as District Director, and we are grateful for his service. Well, when THI was formed 5 years ago, I had a lofty vision for what would become. I shared this vision with all the attendees at our very first summit in 2009. Many of you were likely there. I laid out a vision of collaboration, of more efficient systems, and of better informed policies. I'm proud to look around this room and see the people that have helped make this vision a reality. The results of our collaborative efforts are staggering. Since 2009, 6 million more summer meals have been served, and 300,000 more students eat breakfast each day. We've strengthened public and private partnerships by creating an infrastructure of accountability. Not just accountability to the taxpayer, but accountability to those living in poverty. These public and private partnerships are leading to more efficient, less expensive structures, and are simultaneously creating more access to programs for low-income families in need. Though I was always confident that together we could achieve our goals, looking around this room today, I'm still taken back a little. I'm impressed by what we've done, not THI, but us, all of you in the room today. Over the last 2 days, we've spent time together hearing best practices, dialoguing about policy, taking in research and data, and gleaning wisdom from the work of the people sitting next to you. I'm proud of what we've done to increase food security in Texas. And I'm proud of what we're doing to bring awareness to hunger and poverty in our state and our nation. We're also grateful to be here in Baylor's new McLane Stadium today. Though I'm an avid football fan, what I'm most grateful for is the economic impact this stadium is having on our city. In its first year alone, it will create 6,000 new jobs, according to the Perryman Group. This is significant for a city whose poverty rate consistently hovers near 30%. We're having this conversation here today not because we're trying to impress you, though I'm sure we have, or because we're disconnected from those that we work to serve, but because this conversation needs to be elevated. This conversation deserves to be on the brightest of stages. It needs to be heard at the highest of levels. I'm excited that these conversations are happening. They're happening in our Texas cities with community leaders, mayors, and hunger coalitions. They're happening in Austin between our elected officials and our hunger and poverty advocates. And we need them to happen in Washington. As an appointee to the National Commission on Hunger, I have the privilege of being a part of this conversation with national leaders. I know this role brings with it along much responsibility, and I'm very glad to share what we've been doing in Texas. As often the case, it has been abundantly clear over the last 2 days that we are making great strides. The work happening in our state is at the leading edge of the anti-hunger and poverty community. I promise, leaders from Washington around the country are hearing what is being done here. And when I travel to commission meetings, I'm carrying your voice with me. Though much has changed since our first summit 5 years ago, one thing that has remained consistent is its name. From the beginning, our goal has been to bring organizations and communities and people together at the table. It's more than just a catchy name, it's an exhortation. It's our mission, and we know it can work. We've seen successes in increasing summer meals served, breakfast eaten, and policies passed. We've seen that collaboration, coming together, can work. But right now, there are too many places across our country where it's not happening. In the daily lives of American people, the distance growing between the have and have-nots is growing. A recent S&P report shows that the top 1% of our nation are making an estimated $1.2 million a year. In contrast, the bottom 20% of Texans make a mere $11,000 a year. And the running commentary on our political system centers around discord and the inability of different sides to come together. But we know coming together is the only answer to the question of hunger, and it's the only way we can solve the problem of poverty. We have to come together. We have to talk with each other. We have to work with each other. We have to move through our differences and towards a unified solution. I'm thankful this morning that we're getting to see two of our country's great leaders come together at the table, albeit a little more than a coffee table. I hope that we can leave here and continue to do the same. I hope that we can bring ourselves along with our differences to the same table. It's only at this common shared table that we'll make true progress. It's time for us to stop letting our differences keep us from sitting next to each other. The table has been set. There are people in our communities, our states, and our nation that need us to sit down and find a way towards a solution. Well, the Texas Hunger Initiative has been fortunate to have such a dynamic partnership with Baylor University. One of our most ardent supporters and greatest partners has always been Tommy Lou Davis. Tommy Lou is the Vice President for Constituent Engagement and the Chief of Staff to the President. She serves as the guiding force, ensuring that our university's actions align with our mission of addressing systemic problems facing our community, our nation, and our world. I'm glad she's here with us today, and now to introduce our speakers, Tommy Lou Davis.
Are we thankful for Jeremy Everett? Yes, let's give Jeremy a hand. Thank you for joining us today, and on behalf of Baylor University, welcome to our campus. We're so glad to have each and every one of you here. We are proud and thankful for the work that you do in your communities and for the state of Texas to make this place a better place to live. We so appreciate each and every one of you. And we are very proud to be hosting this summit together at the table. And we are extremely proud of the work that Jeremy has done and continues to do for the least of these. You know, our motto at Baylor is pro ecclesia, or ecclesia, depending on whether you prefer the Latin or the Greek. Pro texana, just had to throw that in. Pro texana, for the church and for Texas. But we've broadened that and expanded that, especially with our new strategic vision called Pro Futuris, for the future. As a Christian university committed to scholarship of the highest quality, Baylor offers a distinctive voice to global conversations about crucial issues such as social responsibility, health care, economic growth, hunger, poverty, sustainability, in a way very few others can. It's our moral responsibility to be a part of that conversation. Pro Futuris calls Baylor to be a place where our Christian faith, in conjunction with our expertise and resources, inspires a desire to address systemic problems facing our community, both locally and globally, and renews our dedication to improvement of self and service to others. As our university's president and chancellor, Judge Ken Starr is charged with the task of increasing Baylor's influence in the nation and around the world. Having a distinguished career in academics, law, and public service, he is well prepared for the task at hand. Our guest today, Congressman Joaquin Castro, is similarly charged with influencing our nation and our world, a charge he has taken on wholeheartedly. Congressman Castro is a second-generation Mexican-American who was born just south of us in San Antonio. He was raised on the city's west side and is a proud product of San Antonio's public school system, just as Judge Starr is. After finishing high school a year early, he left San Antonio to graduate with honors from Stanford University. He then went on to receive his Juris Doctorate in 2000 from Harvard Law School. Having experienced America's promise firsthand, Congressman wants to help build out what he calls the infrastructure of opportunity, so that future generations will have the same chance to pursue the American dream just as he has. After graduating from law school, Congressman Castro returned to Texas and served 5 terms in the Texas State Legislature, representing San Antonio's District 125. And in 2012, he was elected to serve in the United States House of Representatives to lead Texas Congressional District 20, a district that covers a large part of San Antonio and Baylor County. As a member of the House, Congressman Castro serves on the Armed Services Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. In 2013, he was also chosen as co-president for the House Freshman Democrats and named Assistant Whip for House Democrats, charged with assisting in rallying members around important legislation. And I can think of no one better to bring the two sides of the aisle together than Congressman Castro. He continues to be a tireless advocate for those who call San Antonio and Texas home. From supporting military families to investing in education, he remains committed to helping mold an infrastructure of opportunity for his district, for Texas, and for all Americans. We are deeply honored to host you today on our campus and in our community. We look forward to your remarks, and so please join me in welcoming Congressman Castro.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Tommy Lou, an iconic member of the Baylor family, for those of you who are guests to Baylor, you perhaps inferred that, yes, she was a professor of classics, including, of course, Latin, and thus the reference. So we're thankful that she serves brilliantly and sacrificially in the administration, since her first love is the students. And we do say at Baylor, it's all about the students. And so I would like the wonderful president of our student body, Dominic Edwards, have I seen you there? Would you please stand and be recognized? And then she who must be obeyed, Alice, just came in from a meeting, Alice Starr. Excuse me, the First Lady of Baylor. At the office, I have to report to Tommy Lou, and I will leave the rest to your imagination. So in any event, thank you for giving me such benign despotism, both at home and in the office. Well, I love Jeremy's opening comments, a vision of collaboration, and those of you who have come here under the auspices of THI, thank you. This infrastructure of accountability, public-private partnerships, coming together is the only answer. Again, I'm capturing some of what Jeremy so eloquently described. Unified solutions, stop letting our differences get in the way. The Congressman, the infrastructure of opportunity, and I want to begin by adding my own word of welcome warmly to a great person and a great talent and a great representative for all of us, but especially the fortunate people from Bexar County and my hometown of San Antonio who are blessed by your skilled and sacrificial representation. His story is such an embodiment of the American dream. His dear grandmother comes to the United States as an orphan and brought into the extended family. This is the American dream, a welcoming, hospitable place. And then you know the unfolding story and the latest chapter of his election to the United States House of Representatives just demonstrates again the country at its welcoming best, and may we always be a welcoming country. And his service then after, well, I think it's all Jefferson High School. He's a graduate of a great Thomas Jefferson High School in San Antonio, which has had many, many hundreds and indeed thousands of wonderful graduates, one of the oldest public high schools in the San Antonio Independent School District. So with that, but Jeff, of course, said, we call it Jeff, Jefferson High School sent him on his way, along with his rather talented sibling, whom you've heard of. So a very high-achieving family, again, America at its very, very best, off to Stanford, then the Harvard Law School, and then back to serve the public, beginning so promptly. So we're just so grateful for your life of service, and we're thankful that you're so early on in your already very distinguished career. I want to be very personal and just ask you, if you would, Congressman, to reflect on your upbringing, grandma, or whatever you called abuela,
Yeah.
and how those early influences, let's see, I recall your mother dragged you, is that the correct grammar? Asked you to accompany, and your sibling, your wonderful brother, to political events at very tender ages, 8, 9 years of age, painfully boring, but apparently a seed was planted. So do you just want to reflect on life growing up?
Well, first, thank you, Judge Starr, for having me here, for inviting me, and also congratulations on all of the wonderful work that you've done on helping Baylor and the Texas Hunger Initiative focus on issues of poverty and hunger in America. Thank you for your commitment to that. And this university has really blossomed under your leadership. We've followed from afar just how well the sports programs have done at Baylor, the Baylor Bears, the new stadium, but also the incredible academic programs and the initiatives like this that show incredible foresight and compassion in keeping with the Christian foundations of this university. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you to Tommy Lou, to Jeremy for the wonderful introduction and for hosting me here today. I appreciate it. You know, my story is like the story of so many Americans whose families have come here throughout the generations seeking a better life. When my grandmother came here at the age of 6, she and her younger sister, who were 4, really didn't have a choice. They came because both their parents had died around the time of the Mexican Revolution. They came in 1922, and the closest relatives that could afford to take them in were not in Mexico, but were in San Antonio. And so my grandmother ended up with extended family members in San Antonio, Texas, on the west side. And she never made it past the 4th grade. Like many people in her generation, she never graduated from high school, never even got close to graduating. And because of that, my grandmother worked her entire adult life, and including a lot of her childhood, working as a maid, a babysitter, and a cook, to do what many Americans have done, which is to get by for themselves, but also to try to build a better life for their kids and their grandkids. And her only child was my mom, Rosie. And I tell folks that my mom and my dad did the same thing for my brother and I. Both my parents were the first in their families to go to college. My dad graduated in 1963 from UT Austin. I know UT's a bad word around here.
We love them, except not tomorrow.
That's right. I know you're playing tomorrow, so good luck. But my dad was the first in his family to go to college. My mom was the first in her family. And then my brother and I had the good fortune, after growing up of modest means with our family, graduating from Jefferson and then going on to Stanford and Harvard Law School and coming back home. But I often share that story with folks, not because I think that the story is special, but because I think that that story is common to so many of our families. And it's not just a Mexican-American story. That is a story of Irish-American family and German-Americans, Italian-Americans, Asian-Americans, African-Americans, obviously many of whom didn't come, their families originally voluntarily, but who over the years have prevailed over Jim Crow and slavery and prevailed in the civil rights era. It's the story of each generation of Americans building a better America for the next one. And so you mentioned my idea about this infrastructure of opportunity, and I think that when you serve in public office, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent, you have to have some overarching philosophy about the relationship of American government to American society. And for me, it's basically this. I believe that just as there's an infrastructure of transportation, a system of streets and roads and highways that helps all of us get to where we want to go on the road, that the beauty of America is that we've come together to build an infrastructure of opportunity that allows each of us to get to where we want to go in life. And that infrastructure includes certain things, great schools and universities, strong healthcare system, and an economy that's built around well-paying jobs so that when people put in a hard day's work, they can support themselves and their family members. And so when I think of my work in public service and the work of many others, I think of the work that we do in government, but also the work that you do in the community to continue to build out that infrastructure of opportunity so that this generation of Americans and future generations of Americans can also pursue their American dreams.
Let's pick up on that, especially the infrastructure of opportunity. So many of the folks who are gathered here are here as part of the THI collaboration. What can these folks, especially in light of public and private institutions, governments being represented here, what can they do specifically? What's your advice and guidance?
There are some specific things. Well, for example, I believe that we should work to increase the minimum wage. I believe that the state should expand Medicaid in Texas, which has not been done in Texas or in 23 other states. But I want to take a step back for a second and look at the overall context in which we find ourselves. Because I think before we can accomplish some of those specific things, we have to do a great deal of demytholizing poverty and hunger in our country. There are many folks, unfortunately today, who are detached from the facts of poverty in this country and who believe that most people who are poor simply want to be poor or are lazy and don't want to get out of poverty. At some point in our nation, we went from giving people the benefit of the doubt to assuming the worst, I think, in folks. And that's why the work that y'all do is so important, foremost in making sure that, whatever our political affiliation, that we're speaking factually about the condition of people in this country, the fact that most poor are still working poor. I think about my grandmother again. She worked oftentimes 2 or 3 jobs at a time because that was the only way she could make a living. She certainly was not somebody who was just sitting at home doing nothing. But even at the end of her life, my grandmother had type 2 diabetes. She finally succumbed to diabetes in her early 80s. And, the only thing that she had to show for all of those years of work, which she started as a child, was about a $335 a month Social Security check. That's all she was living on. And she lived, the reason that I grew up with my mom and my grandmother and my dad until my parents separated when I was 8 is because my grandmother couldn't afford to live on her own. She had to live with her daughter. She had to live with us so that she could survive. And there are a lot of stories like that, not just senior citizens, but also people of every age who are working, who are trying to make it, which is not to say that there aren't people that abuse the system. Certainly there are. And we have to have safeguards in place to root those folks out and to encourage them to be productive. But I still believe that most people, and the numbers bear it out, are trying. And I give them the benefit of the doubt.
Both of the political parties, Congressman, seem to embrace the concept of public-private partnerships. Share with us your own views. How can those be formed and how can they work best?
Well, I think in American government and American society, no one sector, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, is going to be a panacea for all of the challenges that we face. It requires cooperation. And so in different fields, certainly in overcoming poverty, we work best when we work together. And so, for example, I'm helping USAID out right now on a global, they have what's called a Global Development Lab, which some folks may know about, which works to encourage development in countries around the world. And so what we're trying to do is essentially get the best ideas from individuals and the private sector around the world on how you lift people up out of extreme poverty and do it in many ways, whether it's in providing food relief, but also in providing healthcare relief, working with different foundations like the Gates Foundation on immunizations. So many private foundations have done incredible work, universities that have done wonderful research on combating poverty that were seeded with government money, that were helped along by government funds. And we've got to continue that. We're going through a political period right now where it's becoming a bit out of vogue even to have public and private partnerships. And so I'm quite concerned about the trajectory of the relationships that we've built up to take on together, both the public and private sectors, the challenges of the nation and the challenges of the world.
Let me explore you mentioned foundations and the private sector. We're very thankful that Baylor has a rich Christian tradition, Baptist roots and ties. And I was reminded, just by what you said, that the Apostle Paul, or St. Paul, in writing to the churches of Galatia, said, when I got together in Jerusalem with, I'm obviously paraphrasing, with the real greats, the Peters, the James and Johns and so forth, we deliberated and we agreed on one thing, that we would have care for the poor. Care for the poor. When you read that in Galatians, it's just such a powerful reminder of what our Catholic brothers and sisters call the preferential position of the poor. What should the faith community, regardless of who that faith community is, what should the faith community be doing specifically in this effort?
I've been very grateful and impressed by the faith community, many in the faith community, and their efforts to humanize poverty, to give a human face to poverty, and to remind us of the traditions in the Bible where aid to the poor is fundamental in Christianity and in other religions. And so I think that what the faith community can do, first and foremost, is, as I mentioned, is demythologize poverty and help people understand that there is, of course, a preeminent place for compassion in American society as we approach these challenges. And you know, I think religion can help ease the tensions that sometimes divide us, whether those tensions are because of political differences, racial or ethnic differences, gender differences. The faith community, I think, is a thread that can bring people together in its best work. You know, and there are unfortunate times when faith throughout history has torn people apart. And still people have very severe religious differences today. But when it works best, faith brings people together in the strongest way possible, perhaps in a way that nothing else can.
And have you seen specific examples of that, either in San Antonio or elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. On the issue of immigration reform, for example, you know, the Congress has been trying to pass comprehensive immigration reform now for a few years, and the Senate passed it, but the House of Representatives hasn't. And in the public opinion polls, it shows that probably about 63 to 66% of Americans support comprehensive reform, but it still hasn't passed in the House. But one of the leading voices for passing comprehensive immigration reform has been the evangelical faith community, for the idea that the immigrant ought to be welcomed. Not that you have open borders and you let everybody in, but that you treat people humanely and keep in mind that these are human beings whose biggest crime is that they are often fleeing extreme poverty and desperation. And you know, certainly if you come into the United States unlawfully, you have broken American law. But you're also, many of them, doing it because they're suffering deep troubles, deep poverty.
Well, and especially the children. We have had students here at Baylor who've done extraordinarily well, but they came to the United States with their parents or other family members when they were little children.
Right.
So if you're in the back seat of the car, you just say, excuse me, you can't go across. But
the DREAM Act students, I think, are the most, with Americans, the most sympathetic group, because you know, if your parents brought you, here when you were 4 or 5 or 6 or even 10, it's not like you had a real say in the matter, or like it's not as if you asked to move to the United States, but you grow up and you find yourself in a limbo, and millions of people are still in that limbo.
Let me ask you to address an issue that is always with us, the national debt.
Right.
And the balance, how do we achieve the right balance in getting folks on both sides of the aisle and just Americans of goodwill? The national debt now is reaching the level of $18 trillion. It's on a downward slope. We're thankful for that. But it is clearly an issue. It's certainly an issue for we have 6 grandchildren, our grandchildren. Somebody has to pay the bills. So you have the national debt. It's growing again at a reduced level. We're thankful for that. So how do we balance that through these powerful social needs? You're a very powerful, eloquent spokesperson for it. And at the same time, the burden of the debt. Help us sort through that.
No, and you're right, Judge. It's, we're almost $18 trillion in debt now. The highest, obviously, that we've ever faced in American history. People are very right to be concerned about that. And the debt that we could be leaving future generations. Thankfully, since 2009, that debt has come down from about $1.4 trillion to now, I think next year will be about $500 million. Obviously, until you get it to zero, you're still running in a deficit. And so it's important that we get back there. But I think the main thing that we can focus on is getting people back to work, creating jobs, and investing in things that enable people to be productive. So for example, you know, we spoke earlier when we were visiting about this move recently in Congress to cut billions of dollars from Pell Grants, which enable students to go on and graduate, go on to college and graduate and then move on into their careers. Well, when I describe that infrastructure of opportunity, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that there are policies and programs that enable people to succeed with their own ambition also. You know, nobody's going to go do your problem set for you. Nobody's going to write your paper for you here at Baylor. But with your own hard work and with the right government help, that combination will help people be more productive. And so what we've got to do is continue to make those investments that allow people to be more productive so that they get the job, they can pay the taxes, we collect the revenue, we get out of our debt. But unfortunately, what we've seen over the last few years is this incredible gridlock and hyper-partisanship that is in many ways paralyzed the country. The Congress is paralyzed in many ways. And to give you some context to that, for those of you that are history buffs, in the 1940s, President Truman campaigned against the Do-Nothing Congress. The Do-Nothing Congress passed almost 1,000 pieces of legislation. This Congress will end up passing about 165. So it gives you a sense of how much work we have to do and how we really should be focused on things that help create jobs, help spur the economy. Now, there was good news today in that the unemployment rate is down to 5.9%, the lowest that it's been since July of 2008. But we still have the largest percentage of people that are out of the labor market, which is also a deep challenge. So we've got to find a way to focus on the things that are going to get this country, it's been moving, we've been climbing out of the recession, but I think we could have done it faster if we'd been more focused on the things that are going to help us all be productive.
There's no silver bullet either with respect to poverty or gridlock in Washington. If you could, top 2 ways of breaking down the gridlock.
Yeah, let me answer that, but I also want to make this point, Judge, is that we didn't get into this $18 trillion debt because we helped poor people too much. We got into this problem because there were a select group of very wealthy people, mostly on Wall Street, who quite frankly helped wreck the economy. And I think we've got to remember that when we start to assign blame on those who are in the lower socioeconomic rungs. It wasn't them that ran up $8 trillion, about half of that debt or so. And so I think we've got to be mindful of that. And I think we can point it out in a way that's not nasty towards folks in New York that are on Wall Street working in the banks. But at the same time, when we look at why we are where we are, I think we need to be honest and accurate about how we got here. And then in terms of what we can do with the gridlock, I served 10 years in the Texas legislature, and I often think that we got to take some suggestions we got to take some guidance from some of the practices in the legislature. For example, in Congress, we often vote along party lines for speaker, right? So right now, Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives have a majority. They all vote for John Boehner, most of them do, and Democrats all vote for Nancy Pelosi, who is our leader. Well, something very interesting happened in 2011 in the Texas legislature. There was a Republican majority, but a group of Democrats teamed up, 60-something Democrats teamed up with 11 Republicans and put in a Republican speaker that was willing to work with everyone. That speaker is still in place today, Joe Strauss from San Antonio. I think that if this gridlock continues, if we continue in this counterproductive mode, that we're going to have to fundamentally question the customs and practices that we've been following in Congress. And maybe that's one way that you break through the gridlock. Going against custom and going against the way things have always been is tough, as you know. But we're at a point in our country where we're going to have to consider some innovative ways of breaking through this. The other thing is, Congress doesn't spend enough time in session. I would have liked to have been in session yesterday, but I was in Washington on other business. Congress will end up only being in session this year about 98 or 99 days. So, for example, my wife and I have a young daughter, and I'm often asked, do they live in Washington or do they live in San Antonio? Well, they live in San Antonio because I'm only in Washington 98 days this year. And so, we've got a lot of work to do in Congress in order to be productive for the nation. I think we've got to be there. We've got to be working more. There's certainly, you think about even the last 6 months in our country and all of the big things that have happened, the children coming to our border, our southern border, the events in Ferguson, Missouri, for example. Now what's going on, what happened first in Africa and now here with the incidents of Ebola. the conflict in Syria, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. All of these are very, very big things that demand that Congress be a real participant, an active participant in governing. And unfortunately, I think that Congress has been backbenching it a bit.
One of the great comments.
You know, insulting Congress always gets a clap.
And I was going to say, one thing a moderator should never do is interrupt applause. Well, you commented about the Texas legislature, and it's wonderful to hear that the Texas legislature experience has something to teach the Congress of the United States. And I would be remiss here at Baylor if I didn't say one of our debts to you, moral debts, is during your service in the Texas House of Representatives, and especially in the Higher Education Committee. The Congressman was a tireless and very effective champion for assisting students who want to go to college. And the Tuition Equalization Grant, the TEG, has enjoyed strong bipartisan support and has been so instrumental in first-generation college students, minority students, but just needy families to have their child be able, their student, to attend private higher education. So a counterpart to another very important program, the Texas Grant, to assist those, especially first generation, but just individuals in need. It's a needs-based program to attend one of our wonderful public institutions. So we thank you for that. I think I'd also be remiss if I didn't ask you to address that which does trouble folks, and that is all persons of goodwill would believe in the idea of a safety net. The concern is, could the safety net somehow be transmogrified into a web of dependency? So in the infrastructure that you talk about, how do we address that dimension of a compassionate society, yet wanting accountability?
Well, and that's certainly a legitimate concern. You know, most people are on public benefits for a short period of time. For example, when we had the financial meltdown in 2008, we saw our rolls expand because there were people that were losing their jobs, losing their homes, losing their cars. They were hit hard. And again, for the average Texan or average American, that wasn't their fault that that happened, right? They found themselves in these situations. Other people may have medical emergencies and go bankrupt, paying their medical bills. But there is a group of people who end up dependent and who are, want to come off of public benefits. It is a smaller minority of people. But I think with those folks, what we need is a strong intervention. What you need is not only, is essentially an exit strategy for everybody, right? We're going to help you out when you need it. What is the exit strategy for you to get back on your feet? And some programs are better about it than others. I know at HUD, of course, where my brother is now, with folks in public housing, there is an exit strategy. Well, I think that we need to spread that kind of case management across the other programs so that we're helping people plan, of course, I'm getting assistance now. What's my trajectory to get out from under and get back on my feet? And the overwhelming majority of people want to get up and be independent on their own and be productive. And I think we've just got to be better about helping them do that.
Jeremy talked again so eloquently about stop letting our differences get in the way. Congressman, if you would address the SNAP program, a lot of debate, discussion. Again, I think all persons of goodwill, good faith would say, of course, this is part of the safety net. And SNAP, as it's called, offers, as I'm sure everyone here knows, assistance to literally millions of low-income individuals, and it does provide a number of opportunities. It is the largest program in the domestic hunger safety net. What are your observations about SNAP and finding, for lack of a better term, common ground in terms of how that federal program moves forward?
Well, there was a split in the House and the Senate. The Senate originally, in its bill, its farm bill, cut SNAP benefits by about $4 billion over 10 years from the president's proposal. The House of Representatives was going to cut it by about $40 billion originally. There was a compromise in the end to cut SNAP benefits about $9 billion. I voted against it. I thought that those cuts were too severe. There was also an effort in the end to separate out from the Farm Bill the SNAP portion of that and vote on that separately. Now, these things have been combined for decades now. And so, you know, in terms of how we come to a future agreement, I'm hoping that in the future now, I mean, these cuts are being made, that we won't see that in subsequent years, that we will have passed that. Because I think that we've got to do everything that we can to provide that assistance where it's needed, particularly because we're still coming out of a tough economic time for people. We're still coming out of a tough economy. There are people that still aren't in the workforce who are looking for work. We've been moving along in a digital age where so much more work is now mechanized, whereas it was done by people before. And so, you know, I don't anticipate that next time there will be the same colossal battle over SNAP that you saw before. But the cuts here were tough.
You're very young in your
I just turned 40 this year.
As I said, very
40.
young.
And I should also say, you know, I didn't tell folks, you mentioned my brother. My brother and I are twins. And so when I was back home in San Antonio and he was mayor, I would often get called mayor. And I tell people that there's an easy way to tell us apart. I'm a lot better looking than he is. I'm just kidding.
No comment by the moderator. You both are doing very, very well. And we're proud of you, all of us from San Antonio. We're about to turn this to a broader conversation, National Press Club style written questions, and that'll be it. Let me just ask you to reflect on your career thus far. What do you count, and if you would just be very personal about it, as your own personal greatest victory with respect to those who are at risk in terms of the hungry, those who are languishing in poverty? What's your own biggest victory?
I've spent a lot of time focusing on the drivers of poverty. If you look at the legislation that I filed, that I've passed, the things that I've worked on, a lot of it has to do with the drivers of poverty. So I focus my time on education, making sure more folks go on to college and graduate, on juvenile justice, on combating teen pregnancy, on domestic violence. But I would have to say that the most significant thing was not a piece of legislation. It was something that I worked on starting in around 2005. I'd read an article about my city, our hometown of San Antonio, in the early 2000s. And this article ranked the 70 metro areas by literacy rates. And San Antonio ranked somewhere around 63 or 65 in terms of literacy, how much people read, how many books they buy, all of these things. And so that next year, I started a literacy and book drive that has now become the largest in the city and has raised hundreds of thousands of books and distributed hundreds of thousands of books to schools across the city and to shelters. And that's probably what I'm most proud of, is a way to try to help people become literate, to read more, to become better educated, so that their chances of being poor, of ending up in poverty, are lessened.
Well, we're very proud of our relationship with the Waco community, including collaboration with respect to such programs as One Book, One Waco, and the like. Before we have those questions, someone is coming forward, I think, would you reflect on any ways that you see? You have wonderful institutions. I was just in San Antonio yesterday with the presidents of colleges, obviously UTSA, but a number of private colleges, the community colleges. Are there things, let me just be specific, that a research university such as Baylor could be doing, in your view, that perhaps we're not doing?
Well, y'all are doing a lot, and this is certainly evidence of that. But I think with the resources of the community and the Christian conscience in this community and at this university, I would ask that you do everything that you can to help us combat poverty in the United States and across the world. We have the benefit of living in an age where we can see the condition that people from all over the world live in. We can no longer turn a blind eye to the suffering of people. And we have the resources also to help combat, through technology and other ways, a lot of that suffering and poverty. And I think it's a challenge for Baylor, but also for all our universities to lend a hand to USAID, to the State Department, to private foundations, in doing everything that we can to combat those things.
Thank you. Join me in thanking our special guest, Congressman Castro. And now the tough questions begin.
That's right. Congressman Castro, Judge Starr, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing with us. We've asked our audience members to write down questions that they have, things they want to know, and we've selected a few of those that we'd like to pose to you today. The first one we have is, how can we ensure that our federally supported programs serving our most vulnerable and hungry are protected from another round of sequestration?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sequestration cut deep in many areas of the federal government. And the most important thing is to stay on top of your members of Congress and your state legislators. You think about it, we live in an age now where people have never been so able to express, to communicate and distribute their opinion as widely as they do today. And that includes to members of Congress. So, you know, I follow my Facebook page and my Twitter page. I see all the mean and nasty comments, and the good ones also. But that is the case for most representatives now. And so I think you've got to impress upon them, certainly your own representative, but with technology now, you can speak to all of them, right? Without having to go to Washington, D.C. and visit them. Impress upon them in an organized way how important these programs are. And your voice is amplified, I think, because of these social media platforms now.
Thank you. Our next question, what are the chances of bipartisan legislation around issues of poverty? Have you seen Congressman Ryan's plan, for example, and are there some good ideas that could really help struggling families?
Yeah, and I commend Congressman Ryan for taking the issue up, for spending time and focusing on the issue. As you can imagine, I have disagreements with different parts of it, but I think raising the issue, talking about how we can have the programs, the anti-poverty programs, collaborate better with each other, I think is very useful. His criminal justice reform suggestions are quite useful. Senator Rand Paul, of course, who's probably going to run for president as a Republican, and Senator Cory Booker, who is mayor of Newark, represents New Jersey in the Senate now, are working together on overhauling the criminal justice system, because you know that there's so many people who may have a low-level misdemeanor on their record and then find it very difficult to go rent an apartment or qualify for a job or be interviewed for a job because of that black mark that stays with them forever. And so, you know, these are very promising things, and I commend him for taking those up.
How do we get issues of hunger and poverty to be addressed by candidates, especially in the upcoming midterms and presidential elections?
That's a great question, you know, and it's so tough now in the media environment we have because there's so many big issues that are fighting for attention, but this is a very important issue. And I think that you've got to go to the debates and go to the town halls and submit the questions and ask the questions in person. I've often thought, you know, you'll see on CNN or Fox or MSNBC footage of town halls, and I've often thought people should really go out there and ask a lot of the questions that were asked of me today, and get people on the record for their answers, demand answers to these questions.
Great. And our last question, how can people of faith best reach both parties for meaningful legislation to be passed?
I think the people of faith can help us listen to our conscience, can help humanize poverty, can help put it in perspective and can help reconnect us with the facts. I think that, you know, you have people of both parties. I'm Catholic. People of both parties whose faith is very important to them. And so when they're spoken to by others of faith, certainly by clergy, they really take that to heart in a way that you don't always, I think you consider it in a different vein than you do a political argument even, right? Or even an argument from a supporter or an opponent who's simply speaking politics. So there is an incredible role that the faith community can play and should play in this dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.